Hey y'all, so I haven't made a video on transmedicalism in a hot minute, and I think this video will largely explain why. I don't have much of an intro for this one, so let's just get into it. Early in my channel, I had a pretty even balance between the content I make now, which is predominantly about religion with some science and ethics thrown in there, and videos talking about transmedicalism. Obviously, that has shifted to be pretty much entirely neglecting transmedicalist content, and this video, I think, is the reason why. Before I go any further, I do want to give a definition of transmedicalism, as it's often misunderstood to be something that it's not. Transmedicalism is the belief that you need gender dysphoria to be transgender, and as a result, transness is medical rather than social in nature. That is all it means. It does not mean that you need to fully medically transition to be trans, that we hate non-binary people, or that you hate gender non-conforming trans folks. While like any group, there are people who hold varying opinions, which stem from this core belief, the vast majority of modern transmeds do not think you're cis if you don't take literally every possible step to transition, if you're gender non-conforming, and many of us, including myself, believe in and support non-binary folks. Moving on from the basics, why am I talking about this now, especially when I haven't touched the topic in 8 months? There's two main reasons, admittedly, as a personal clarification for those who enjoy my content, and particularly the many viewers I have who enjoy my religion and ethics content, but do not agree with the views on transmedicalism, as well as for other transmeds to maybe do some introspection here. I want to clarify that overall, my views have not changed. I am still a transmedicalist, I still support non-binary, I still think that gender is neurological, and I still am a transmedicalist because I value research over social acceptability, not because I give a single shit about respectability politics. This is because the research I base these opinions on has not changed, and as such, neither have my opinions on the topic. All that being said, I think there's a bit of nuance from both my side of the aisle and from inclusionists that really has been rejected when discussing the current position particularly those of us from the US, find ourselves in and how that affects the trans community. While I personally see no value in respectability politics and find them to be both generally useless as well as just a bad reason to hold an opinion, I won't pretend that that's the case for all transmedicalists. I'm going to be upfront and critical to people in my camp before I get into the issues I see with the other extreme of this, because I think it's important to not only call out the behavior of those you oppose, but also people in your own communities as well. To be frank, now is not the time to be advocating for transmedicalism. That does not mean that you should have to change your views, pretend to believe things that you don't, or nod along when someone says something that you believe is harmful. However, transmedicalism is of very little relevance to the current issues we're dealing with right now. While I wish we could change the minds of far-right people with research and data that's on our side, that group has gotten to a point where they no longer trust any science, and unfortunately, whenever they've already decided that 1, trans people are an enemy, and 2, no science matters, it goes in one ear and out the other. We are no longer at a point where ideas, I think, arguing in favor of transmedicalism really have any relevance. Prioritization of care is not even a thing when trans health care is being heavily restricted and clearly on the road to being banned as a whole. There will be no care, not just poorly managed care. We are no longer dealing with simply uneducated people who can be pointed in the direction of credible research. We are dealing with people who think science comes after the words of the people in power that they choose to take as the word of God. We are no longer a community as trans people purely for support and advice and camaraderie and or commiserating. We are back to a point where we need to take real life tangible action to be allowed to continue to exist at all, and having a community serves as a route to that activism. We need all of the allies we can get right now, and unfortunately, if that person is someone who also denies all of the actual science and wants to treat our identity as a personal quirk or being silly on the internet as cat gender, at least that person is on our side in a grander scale. There are people who deny and ignore research on every side of every debate, and at this point, it's somewhat of a beggars can't be choosers situation, in my opinion. None of this means that you as a transmedicalist need to be buddy-buddy with the quote-unquote trans men lesbians or xenogender users or non-dysphoric people. You don't have to be their friends, you don't have to agree with them, and you don't have to pretend to agree with something you don't. But if you're taking the time to do activism, keeping and restoring our rights as a whole should take first priority. Essentially, it's a conversation for a different time. It's a conversation I still believe it needs to happen. It's a debate that's worth having. And it also should not be where you're putting your energy if you're in America for the time being. On the other end of this, of course, I have seen many posts, especially on TikTok, from inclusionists stating essentially, you need to change your beliefs as a transmedicalist because the world sucks right now. And I think that that's lacking in two places and frankly is a bit entitled. For one, while I won't outright say that everyone who identifies with the xenogender or who self-IDs as non-dysphoric will never be affected by both these laws and changing social attitudes, there is a vast difference between someone who, because they want to, presents and is fine being perceived as their assigned gender at birth, and someone who does not. Of course, there are people who are self-proclaimed non-dysphoric who still medically transition or who are socially transitioning and openly and or visibly trans, and there are people who use labels I personally would say have no relation to gender or transness, like xenogenders, who also identify with FTM, MTF, or non-binary, and again, will not be perceived as cis by the public. And there are also people who do not. People who are perfectly fine living their day-to-day life being perceived as their assigned gender at birth. Many of these sentiments I've seen are that, quote, they won't care when they come for us. And while I think that there's truth in that, it neglects the fact that there are people who identify as trans, yet are fine living as a functionally cis person of their AGAB, and they will not be affected. They will not be perceived as trans and as such will not be hate crimes. They will not lose access to medical care as they did not want it to begin with, and they will not be targeted by laws like the gender fraud bullshit because they don't care enough to change their gender marker. It is perfectly fine to acknowledge that certain people are at higher risk than others. I, as a trans man, am at a lower risk of harm than a trans woman. And a trans man living in my home state versus where I live now is at more risk than me. Someone who is mid-transition is at more risk than someone who is stealth. Black and immigrant trans folks are at more risk than any other non-black and or non-immigrant trans people in any of those categories. Acknowledging those things does not mean that you are discounting the experiences of others. It means knowing who we most need to protect and look out for, and being aware of our own individual privilege and how we can use that to help others in our community. It is not wrong to say, no, they won't, in response to sentiments that we're all at the same level of risk for identifying as trans. Not only in the sense that people happy presenting as their AGAB won't be at risk, but in acknowledgement that that statement in general is not true. Aside from that idea, I've also seen a lot of people just straight up saying, you shouldn't be a transmedicalist because the world sucks. That if you don't accept FTM lesbians or catboy as a gender, you are just as bad as conservatives and you are just as much part of the problem. Well, as I stated earlier, I definitely do agree now isn't exactly the time to be debating those things. I do think it's quite entitled and, to be honest, a bit facetious to fully expect people to change their beliefs because you decided to compare people who are still overall on the same side as you to a group drooling over a man who did a Nazi salute. I think now is a time to agree to disagree on both sides. We don't have to agree on everything to all just shut up for a second and focus on not losing the minute amount of rights and respect that we have left. And while my personal perception is not a reflection of all transmedicalists, it is irritating that in an attempt to put those things aside for now, but not change my opinions considering no actual evidence has been presented or compelling arguments have been made, means that they cannot afford me and other transmeds with this mindset the same respect to go, let's just deal with this later. To conclude this, while it has been nice to see more people coming out of the woodworks to say that they hold the views that I share, something that I've been told many times while running this channel is scary and that they simply pretend to believe things they don't for the sake of not being harassed. I don't think that that kind of resurgence of transmedicalism is an appropriate response to the issues that we're presented with right now. My TLDR of this whole video is that we all need to learn to agree to disagree in certain situations. Beggars can't be choosers, and that goes for inclus and transmeds. I will not befriend or blindly agree with the person who yells at me for saying that their gender isn't autism, but I will stand up for their right to basic human respect, to not be discriminated against, and to access healthcare. And that person has no obligation to befriend me or to nod along and pretend we agree either. But if they treat me as an enemy instead of someone who cares if they get denied a passport, medical care, or just decency, that is just as much sowing division as inclus claim being transmedicalist is. We can all work together right now and settle our differences when we even have the space to safely exist at all. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like my content and want to support it, please subscribe and like this video if you liked it, or dislike it if I pissed you off or whatever. If you want to financially support me in continuing to make content, please check out my Ko-fi or commission prices in the description, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Ha det.
The children think too much, they've hardly a fear of God, always asking questions they should only wish away. Sundays everywhere.